smiling, they would know that Magis is an ignition program for young adults. The gentleman that introduced it into Africa is the founder and executive director of my organization now, the Catholic Youth Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, simply Tangaza. Because we had worked together and he had introduced me to spirituality in the Catholic Church. I did not know there was spirituality up until I was about maybe 21. I knew the prayers, I knew catechesis, I knew the usuals, but I didn't know that we had lines of spiritualities. So I was amazed to hear of the Ignatian spirituality and somebody telling me that you can find God in all things. And I was like, really? In all things? And the basic answer was simple. He created everything and therefore he's omnipresent. Omnipresence basically means even when you're sitting in the darkest pit, he is there. Because he is omnipresent. Omnipresent is everywhere. And I'm not a theologian by any right. So I was coming back to thank him. And I was looking for a way. Have you ever had this urge of somebody who did something so great to you, and you forever feel indebted, but because you are as ambitious and as characterized as David, you don't want to owe anyone any debt. So you'd like for a chance to pop up for you to pay back. If you're like that, careful. We are usually the vengeance type as well. So I was looking for an opportunity to come and pay back Alan. Then I heard from the bars in the town that he was setting up an organization and an NGO. And in fact, in my mind, I knew NGOs to be Red Cross, Catholic Relief Services. And I didn't doubt that he could set an organization of that magnitude. But first, long story short, I came to help set up an organization. Then I was sent to the UNEP for my first meeting. And my oh my. That day is one of the days whose memories I do not relish, but I do cherish. Because when I walked out of that meeting at around 4 o'clock, my heart was beating in my ears and they were hot. Because abbreviations and acronyms were flying left, right, center, top, down. And I didn't get a thing, to be very honest. Other than that, this is the ambassador of this country and this is so on and so forth. Those are the basics I got. In fact, I knew that UNEP, and it's the only global headquarters of the UN in the global south. There are only 4, and this one is the only one in the global south. But when they said that it is in Gigiri, you will know I'm a person of the house. So we have another town called Gilgil. And in my community, we are known to curate names out of existing names. And we don't always do it right. I will not use the examples of our speakers here because each of them, in fact, when I think about their names right now, would have a domesticated, not very nice version of your names, especially the first ones. So they say Gilgil, and in my native language, Gilgil, they call it Girigiri. So, and then you've had Gigiri. So if somebody would say Gigiri, I would think Gigiri is Gilgil. They don't just know how to pronounce it right. This is a person who has gone through the 8 minus 4 minus 4, ended up with 0 education. But I did not, I've studied the UNEP, you could see in my books, answered questions and everything, but I did not know that they were very close home. In fact, I bet you that many of you do not know the exact location of the UNEP right now. It's not your fault. It's not. It's in a diplomatic blue zone that is highly protected. And we know the situation, whether it's intergenerational historical trauma that comes with colonialism and so on. We are very careful not to step in zones we are not invited. In fact, we leave the gospel of, do not sit at the front seat, lest the matriarch or the host comes and takes you behind. So we dare not go to Gigiri unless you're going to apply for the US visa. We dare not pass by there even when you're driving our own cars because it's a highly diplomatic zone. We don't even know how to access it. But then I had the chance to do that. And when I went back, I said, I'll never go back there. But then I ranted for about 20 minutes. And then I asked for advice from my colleague, Alan, who is an environmental planner and manager, so he knew all these things. And his advice was, after, you know how you can rant for a very long time? Imagine now it's a WhatsApp message, you've written 10 paragraphs, and then the person you are addressing to responds and says, go back again. I have never forgiven him until now, and he knows, but I am very grateful because I went back. So now, because I was in this space that I did not understand a thing, I put it on myself to learn as much as I could. By observation, by doing it and getting it wrong, which I would encourage all of you to try it out. If you don't think you should, read the story about David, especially in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. And then you will see what trying and getting it wrong can give you. So I kept on going, and then I discovered there were opportunities where I could be able to engage now as a negotiator of the text you hear people talking about. For example, I think COP is the most popular, the Conference of Parties. And when people are talking about COP, they usually talk about the UNFCCC COP. They don't know there are other COPs of UNCCD and UNCBD and so on. But when people say COP, now people know the next COP will be in Dubai. But they don't know, and there goes my bell. So now, let me rush. So the way I've phrased, the reason why I have put it that way is so that you see that I relied on journalism, I relied on expert communication to build my knowledge about the engagement in the processes of policy making, even when I was exercising that environmentalism on the ground. And then I discovered quickly that the environment is everything. Despite the fact that my class 4 teacher told me that the environment is everything that surrounds me, which means my neighbor is also the environment, hello. I did not put that into real practice. I did it for passing exams, and I did. But now I found myself in a space where I need to understand things, and I'm relying on journalists and what they say. And so I'm looking at journalism from a Catholic, from an environmental, and from a diplomatic perspective in this case. From a Catholic perspective, we have had for the longest time, until I think the Synodal Church came in, kind of hierarchical top-down communication. Episcopal letters, you know, an address from your priest, an address from your chairperson, or now called moderator in the Archdiocese of Nairobi. But increasingly now, the Synodal Church has sort of inverted the pyramid. And now the hierarchies, the magisterium wants to hear from the laity, and they want to hear from everybody else. So your role now has changed from that person who was getting information from I up there and bringing it down here, to the person that is doing it two-way. I think there is the models of PR, and one of them is two-way symmetrical communication. It may not be symmetrical yet, but then we are getting there. As an environmentalist, what do I look out for? Increasingly, we have people who are able to problematize issues in the environment. We have people who are able to call out things like Linus puts it out. But we must also be aware that that is what the world is hungering for from where I sit. That in fact, as a consumer of information, I see that negative news tend to sell the most. That if we say Linus was here, that doesn't sell much. Father Steve was here, that doesn't sell much. But if we just added a line, Linus and Father Steve were here, they almost fought. That and it sells, right? That's the same case in environmental journalism, and what I see journalists sometimes trying to struggle to do. Because we are living in a society where the evil is so loud and righteousness is modest, quiet, and shy. So you will never make good information unless there is a spice of negativity in it. That is why, for instance, as a faith-based environmentalist, I sort of lament that we have so many people who associate with some kind of faith. In Africa, the rates are as high as 90%. that if you meet somebody out there, chances are they believe in something. And faith is not religion. Religion is part of faith. I think people would understand that. But when we go to spaces like, for example, the climate space, which is more popular, the COP. In COP27, we had around 4,000, if not 10,000, 8,000 journalists, I think. If I'm not mistaken, I stand to be corrected. Guess how many were faith-based? Anyone guesses? Chorus answers aloud. One? Whoever said one got 50% right, which means there were how many? There were only two faith-based environmental journalists. Luckily, by sheer chance, when we were requested to invite by Nazarene colleagues from wherever quarters we know, one of them happens to be here. The first, the one that is behind the camera here, was one of the two. The other one was a print journalist, I think. And guess what? They were both Catholic. So now I'm driving these two so that you can, as journalist students, see where the spaces for engagement exist. You can aspire to be on news guy, but there can only be one good, fantastic news guy. But you can also decide to create your own gang of news. You can venture into a field that then, for example, the media houses would find interesting. If you were to cover faith, environment, policy making, and so on, then that would be a niche because we have a scarcity of journalists in that line. The other thing is we have a scarcity of journalists, especially on our root continent, who have a clear understanding, for example, of diplomacy. And you can't blame them. Because it takes time to learn in the ropes. You're not yet there until I think you're dead. But you can come into the diplomatic spaces and you have the advantage, you being Kenyan or being here in Nairobi, of being able to access the UN Environment Program through organizations like Tangaza, and even I think through Tangaza, UNESCO has been represented here. Tap into those opportunities for you to be able to engage. It is not rocket science to be able to learn diplomacy. And for you, it will be very easy because now there are people who have been in the system quite for some time, who might not be able to tutor you on journalism because you're an expert in that line, but they can be able to offer you guidance into diplomacy and negotiating. How many of you report on, for example, the outcomes of the African Ministerial Conference on the Environment, which has been here since 1985? We have sort of limited ourselves, in my view, to reporting actions on the ground, and that's good. Renewable energy, electronic vehicles, and so on and so forth. But we increasingly need people who can be able to translate policy into a language that is easy to understand, and also people who can be able to understand the language, the ordinary language at the bottom there, and bring it to the policy-making platforms. Often, I see that we are reporting to the hollow, the masses, the usuals, right? But we rarely, for example, report to educate and inform scientists and our legislators. We can fault them for making laws that you think are archaic, but most of them do it from a point of ignorance. You are studying in a Catholic institution. Do you know, for example, that there is a Catholic institution for a Catholic grouping for MPs in our August House that you could totally engage with and demonstrate how faith also connects with legislation? On issues of where to start, I echo the sentiment of Father Steve and Linus that you have to be very passionate. But I would like to add a phrase that we use in our Sinessa Formation series, that you have to be intentionally present and available. You cannot show up today, wait for 3 years, and then come back later and expect to learn. It will not be progressive for you. Start where you are. Start with the small actions. Make simple commitments. For example, my commitment is, and I say this respectfully, I do not take plastic bottled water. For this reason, I have understood that if I have to be, as Laudato Si says in paragraph 19, become painfully aware of the sufferings of the excluded, then I have to associate with their pains. We go to the villages, for instance, and because sisi ni watu wa Nairobi, we are coming from Nairobi for the sake of Martin, I'll fix broken taps in my house. It could be I will only consume sustainably, such that when I'm walking through town and I find a pair of shoes, I remember I already have 16 other pairs. I really don't have to buy it because I'll just have a pair of feet. When the environment has made the scene into journalism, and as Rainer says, it's likely to overtake politics. As a negotiator of policy on the environment, I have to look at it on both sides. It's a good thing, but it could quickly turn ugly. I just hope that this will be the environmentalization of politics and not the politicization of environment. Because everything that for some reason politics tends to come in touch with gets to take a different face. I like to conclude by saying that journalism has a big role in bridging the biggest distance in the world. And the biggest distance in the world is the distance between the mind and the heart. Because what the mind conceives, sometimes the heart doesn't accept, and sometimes what the heart accepts, the mind, or what the heart conceives, the mind does not accept. That is why most of you have gone to conferences, have gone to catechesis, have gone to religious classes, have gone to journalism classes, but you rarely apply what you gain from those conferences into real life. It is a human problem. I think it's designed as a human inadequacy for us to conquer. As a journalist, you can decide to make things simple so that the very common person at the ground can understand them. For example, you must be able to speak the language of the people on the ground, but also be able to speak the technical and scientific language, so that then you can be the bridge between these two. Increasingly, it's clear there are very many concepts that will come up in environment. There are very many concepts that will change in landscape, but we don't have them, for example, in our vernacular languages. We talked of a tree whose English name perhaps exists, but we don't know. But what's climate change in your native language? In Tanzania, they tried to translate it, it became a sentence. Or is it mabadiliko tabia nchi not a sentence? It is, right? So in my native language, we don't have that. Now, what I see journalists sometimes getting it wrong is trying to show to my mother and my grandmother the term climate change. But what my mother and grandmother understand is the impacts of climate change. I think it's enough for them to understand drought and famine and for you to know that that is climate change. We don't have to shove it down their throats. But when we are coming now to communicate with the technocrats, now we have to call it climate change. I thank you for your audience, and may the Lord that granted you the grace to listen to me, grant you the grace to be listened to.
All right. What a powerful delivery from Mr. David Munene. And I think there's something that is really talked about that I, as an individual, would like to mention. In reality, we have so many policies that are there on paper. And these policies, when you go out in an environment, if you do a vox pop, you know we are journalists here. If you do a common vox pop in the streets at the Catholic University, in the streets of Nairobi, you'll get people who don't understand so many things. And when I look at myself as an individual, I'm someone who likes events, I like fun. Because through events that are fun and engaging, it's very easy to break down very, very structured communication. Now I'd like to give a practical example because it's going to touch on all the presentations and talks that have been made here. Recently, last week, we had an event in Kibera by the name Community SDG Festival. The reason why we had this event is because we have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But in reality, if you go out there and ask people what are the SDGs, they really don't know. And SDG number 13 is climate action. You'll find that in the streets, so many people are doing things, but they don't know they're contributing to the SDGs. And with this, I believe our guests, these students that you see here, are very creative. We have so many innovations. This December, we are planning to have an event to translate to the whole world about disability and inclusion. We are calling it Ability Celebration Festival. We want to bring all people with disabilities who are intelligent, who have successful stories, because the narrative that's there in the world currently is that, these people of disability, they cannot do things, they are not outstanding, and we believe this can be an area of how we can mentor each other, to train each other that communication is not only being in front of a camera, but you can communicate through events, you can communicate through breaking down information. We have only 15 minutes for tea break. That means we shall be back quarter to 2.
Quarter to 2.
Yes.
But before that, we had a song. We need to release. Our guests will be leaving first. Father Dominic will be guiding them to where they will be taking their tea refreshments. And we want them to live in style because they have done a great job, right? Let's clap for them, guys. Let us appreciate them. Thank you so much once again. And so we shall all rise up as we watch them exit in style, right? Let us all rise up.
The emperor, the conqueror, the champion, the lion is here. Zobo, zobo, winning by.
ISC faculty, you'll have to escort our guests. Now we are going to walk out together.
Yeah, they're going to walk out together in style. Then Berdiana in the net, you're going to give us the students the next move that you're going to take.
So
Meanwhile,
Berdiana, please coordinate with the rest of the team. So faculty of ISC.
And our guests.
And our guests.
We're living in style. DJ.
The emperor, the conqueror, the champion, the lion is here.